Okay, well, bright lights, stage, not quite used to that. I've got some slides which should hopefully frame my discussion now, although I can't promise that I won't deviate, but I'll do my best. So, we're part of the Pause initiative and moving on with that, and I'll talk a little bit about Pause in Hull, but also want to talk a little bit about Hull, because Hull is where these women live, and some of you will have a view of Hull, some of you might not. Some of you might not even know where it is, so I've done a map. I have to say it looks slightly different to that picture there. It's a bit more modern, but that was in 1865, so it's been around a while. So you can see where we are. Population, it's a relatively small city, and with most cities, it's a mixture and a mixed place. So post-war, just as a little fact for you, apart from here in London, the most bombed place outside of London. So that you'd have all thought Coventry, but no, it's Hull. So we can't even get that bit right in our marketing. Typical of many places that have relied on sole industry, so fishing, collapsed, socio-economic problems, all that stuff you would associate with it. So this is maybe something of what you think about Hull. Maybe this is the place that these women, where they live, understand Hull to be. Looking into the future, we've got a different place that is Hull, where some people have aspiration and hope. One of the most invested areas outside of London in terms of industry, as you can see there, Greenport. Siemens, the largest capital investment they've ever made outside of Germany for wind turbines and all the rest of it. And you must know, we're the City of Culture 2017. We've got the Turner Prize coming. And what I'm saying here really is, how many of these women will see this picture of Hull as their place they live and hope, and what can they get part of? You talked a little bit about there around them doing things, getting out, being part of a more positive community. And what I'm saying is that wherever you are, there is a positive place to be, except for some of these women, they're a small number, and we don't necessarily focus enough on making sure they're part of all of this. Millions and millions of pounds worth of investment, opportunity. And we've got a whole year of stuff happening in 2017. And part of our ambition, really, and why Pause, which I say right at the bottom, is that it really fits with our ambition with this vulnerable group and all vulnerable groups. And that's why I feel quite humble in the job I'm in, because every day I see loads of practitioners, schools, early years, mental health practitioners, whoever, working with the people in Hull so they're much better equipped to be part of something that we're trying to develop and make the place a better place to live. So I think you've had a perspective there around some of the issues that the women face, and we'll go a bit more around the specific things in Hull. But really, you know, why we've chose Pause. One is a clear need. You've seen the numbers, and we'll reiterate some of that in the next slide or two. As an area, we've worked with Morning Lane and developed systemic practice. So all our social workers have been through that. We work in pods. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but that's a small unit. 4 social workers, family worker, clinician, caseload, different kind of supervision, a different way of really working. And we've seen some benefits of that with some direct work with some of the people we work with. It's not without its challenges. It's intensive. It costs maybe a little bit more. And I try to hide that with manipulation of budgets, but and I'm quite committed to it. And we're committed to implementing this systemic practice right across through our early help, our youth offending teams going through that, they're located, even our management teams are reflective practice, systemic types of approach, because I think, and this is again a little bit about my role in some of this, but if we don't model what we think is right from the very top and all the way down, then we'll be sat here in about 5 or 6 years, or whenever, having another innovative discussion about how we get things to work together. And so we've got some evidence. I've already mentioned that, you know, what we don't want is for Hull to become this fantastic place. Well, we do want it to become a fantastic place, but we don't want to leave behind just about everybody else that's already left behind. So for Pause really does fit around our ambition, philosophy and working practice. And before I go on to onto some of these numbers, so you can just look at the various slides, which kind of just reaffirms what you've already heard this morning. My role particularly, I think, and then when you talk about what can local authorities do, what I can't do, I suppose, is I'm not a practitioner and I can't get involved in some of that stuff, not because I'm probably not good enough to do it, if I'm honest. However, as I talk through this, a lot of the work and the obstacles the women face, the practitioners will face. They may well walk together to the housing office, but the computer says no. The policy says, oh no, I can't do that. Yeah, I've agreed this and I've agreed the other. Oh, but sorry, no. So part of my role, as I see it, and others, is that I'm at different tables in the organisation, across the city, across the partnerships, and I can ring somebody up who can make it happen. So one example was, one of our women really needed a GP's appointment for a particular thing, to benefits and all the rest of it, but the computer said no. You know, I was able to go influence, rightly or wrongly, the computer to say yes. And so I think that's quite important about when you think about how you're going to construct your pause or any intervention, how much does it really matter? Because when Sophie George came up and said to her, and we sat down and said, you know, do you want to part this bid? It's all wonderful. Have a look at your numbers. It'll save you loads of money. It'll help all these women. Everyone at top table. Oh yeah, brilliant. We'll have a go at that. That sounds right. Why haven't we done it before? Well, the reason why you haven't done it before is it's not actually that easy. And some of the conversations you have are probably less about the women and the challenges they face, but more about how the organisation and organisations have failed or continue to create things which they think is right, and it means that it's equitable for everybody and you can't jump queues and all the rest of it. But sometimes, you know, somebody just does have to jump a queue. And I don't know whether I should be promoting that in my position, but nevertheless, in terms of making some of the real impact on some of these people's lives, it does sometimes, it's not about radical systems, it's just about thinking about what is right and what makes sense. And that's probably harder than some of the other professional issues you get. Because on the ground, all I see is lots of health visitors, children's centre workers, social workers, teachers trying to work together. And then when I try and look at why isn't that working, it's because people like me have sat somewhere and designed something that really prevents them from doing it. So anyway, that's that bit. So Hull Pause cohort, very typical pitch that you've already seen. So this is Hull, these are our women, not collected nationally, not part of Hackney's model. We've got 56 women, 203 children since 2010. We've identified 20, they've got 63. There's the ages. And I'm just interested to think about Hull in terms of league tables. We're right at the top in terms of the rate of looks after children. And maybe that's not necessarily where we want to be. But you can see, you know, we've got a lot of, in terms of the national, we've got a lot of children that are in care, maybe because of the stuff around deprivation, maybe because we're a very confined city without that hinterland that sometimes averages things out a little bit for others. But what we do know is we know the children and we know they're in our care, and we need to think about why they are there. And then when you look at this group of women and these children, you kind of think, well, if we only took half of them out, we'd be sort of closer to that average that Ofsted say we should be nearer to. So, some real practical and obvious evidence-based reasons why we should get on and do this kind of work. So where are the children? Similar to, slightly different. Majority of ours just are in foster care. We've done well with getting some adopted, and then there's a mixture of the usual kind of care orders, special guardianships and all the rest of it that many of you will be familiar with. What we haven't done, and something that we need to do, is really, and something I'm interested in, is to think about some of the outcomes for children. We know generally they're not great and all the rest of it, but specifically for these that we know. Because I think sometimes, in terms of those commissioning managers, and some people said, you know, how do we get people to work together and how do we influence housing? Some of this is interesting, but when you can start talking about a real person and a real story and a real life, then sometimes that influences people to do things maybe a bit differently and take the risk. And I think my role really has been to allow already some of those people who can make changes to do those changes. So we want to do some more work around where these children are, what happens to them, the relationships they have, as well as the evaluation that you already will be very focused on, which is some of the women and the way their lives change and what comes of them. Because if you're talking systemically, what does all of that mean? It means looking at the whole, and that's why it's quite complex and challenging. So there we are, what have the women experienced? Well, we've already talked about that. You'd guess that a lot of this is actually quite underreported, because 2/3 have experienced domestic violence, a third haven't. Some of this is about collecting information, taking it with a pinch of salt, wondering, well, what does that actually tell us? What that tells us is that at a very early point in this person's life, things could have been different. And somehow, in all those things I've just talked about, we've perpetuated a system which means that they'll carry on, experience some or all of this stuff. And I'm not saying that we'll create some utopia where nobody experiences this stuff. But nevertheless, we do seem to lose focus about what it is that we are trying to achieve for some of the most vulnerable. So things around housing, things around mental health, access to services, earlier, conversation around we don't meet this threshold so you can't come in, there we are. And, even on one of those earlier slides, Mary couldn't get into the inn and she had to go into the stable. So we've got some, going on forever. Sometimes we don't even have stables, and that's part of the problem. We have parks where sometimes we found women living. That's not right. How can that be right? Yet that's existed. And somehow, until we've had a look and said, that's not right. And said, well, yeah, that's not right. So what are you doing about it? Oh, well, I don't know. The policy says no. So there's something around understanding what all of these things mean in the context of how they've been allowed to happen. And in terms of the sustainability of pause and the stuff around early help and early intervention, these groups are actually quite interesting because they are, if you like, the culmination of a whole bunch of failures, bad experiences in life, poor parenting, exclusion from school, whatever it might be. And you can really understand what's at the heart of some of the most difficult problems, really. And so that's why pause is quite a widespread and understood, seniorly led, innovative thing in Hull, because I think it's actually quite a very useful demonstration of how we can actually do things quite a bit better. So where are we now? Started in the 15th of May. We've got operational manager, we've got all the practitioners, we've got a pod coordinator. In the systemic world, we call them pod coordinators, they're admin staff. Unfortunately, in times of austerity, admin staff tend to get cut, so we don't call them that. They're very fundamental pod coordinators and slip by my finance director's budget code line. So we've managed to get quite a number of pod coordinators. So all our pods, we've got 3 local area teams as example, 3 areas. We've got 7 pods in each area, so that's however many that is, 21 pod coordinators, 21 admin staff for your social workers. Can you imagine? You'd go through them when you were looking at your budget. So nevertheless, absolutely fundamental and critical because it allows practitioners and people who are trained and can get the relationship with the women to do what they do best. And somebody with an organised brain to organise these people because they're not always the same skill set. Current activity. We mentioned we'd identified 20, and this will go to some of the challenges we faced. 12 women engaged, 8 women we've larked. I'm not sure whether that verb is real or whether it will ever be accepted in the Oxford Dictionary, but as I wrote it, I thought, it'll do. Everybody around here will know what I mean. Referral pathways. And again, we can't avoid, you have to understand the world we live in, and referral pathways are very much part of that. And a lot of the work we've had to do is to try and understand what they look like, because these women won't understand what they like. Our practitioners don't even understand what they like because they've never had to go through them. So we've done a lot of work around sexual health, debt management, housing, more work around there. I'll cover that in challenges in a minute. Mental health, substance misuse, etc. One thing we had was around GP practice, not being registered or don't like being the one you've wanted. So we worked with one GP practice, which is in the centre of Hull, which will, if the women want to, will take them on without any fuss, no problems, so they can get the GP services they need. And the GP practice and everybody in there knows what pause is about and why these women are there. So again, a small thing, but we had to have a conversation with the CCG and said, can you make this happen? And they made it happen, and everybody's happy. So, that's where some of the challenges you will face when you set some of it up. It's not the complexity of the problem with the women, which it is, but surrounding that is the complexity of the world we've created to manage budgets, manage people, practice our professions. And so that's where we are now. So the challenges. First one is finding them. We've got them on databases, this, that, the other. We've managed that. We know the numbers of children. We know where the children are. Do we know where the women are? Not necessarily. They live chaotic lives, many. That's a challenge. That's why you do actually need sometimes to think, not everybody is the same, and some people need a little bit more effort than others to help and find them. So we found some, working with them, 12 we've said. Four women don't want to work with us. Best will in the world, they're not interested. So again, what does that mean? How do we work with that? Does that mean we forget about them? Not really. But again, part of the innovation and the challenge and the learning is that you've heard all the wonderful theory, how this all works, and we'll get all these people together, it's great. Some people don't want any of it. So that is very much, when we went to look to appoint people, we didn't specify a profession. What we specified was a character, really. And we tried to appoint people who could empathise with and work with and gain the trust of some of these women. So social worker, maybe, whatever they are, they're a mix. And we'll see what that looks like. Because that challenges the boundaries, both of your pay scales and your job evaluations, I have to say, and how you get everybody working better together. The other thing I'd want to say about challenges is most of these women are well known and have got a history. So when you go knocking on housing's door, they'll know of them. Interestingly, for us, on a case, again, this common sense thing, and you have to sort of have a phone call, one of the women was on the referral pathway we've worked out for, but it's her partner, he's a problem. So they don't want her to be somewhere in case he comes in and he's a problem. So suddenly, the sins of her partners are being visited upon this woman, who was the one in the park, and what's that about? And then you have to have that conversation. There's a narrative and a story, and somebody has to give permission for that policy to be flexed, maybe. Some areas do it better. Hackney, clear slate model, I think we talked about. Our housing department policy, the organisation isn't quite there yet, but it will be. Other problems, we talked about the lark and getting them larked. That's a tough ask, and I think the question was, how does it happen? Well, it'll take time, I guess. But that's why people sat earlier on, many of you around here are probably better suited to doing that than maybe I would be. The boundaries, it's intensive therapy. It isn't just, a cup of coffee and a quick chat. There is a purpose behind all of this. And again, that can be challenging because it's different. And there's a commitment, and you will keep coming back to working with them. There isn't a get out, if you like, and you want to help. That'll be difficult. Maintaining engagement. Again, already within the 12, that's a challenge. So you said, well, we're only working with 8 women, and you go, God, 8 women, my social work teams, they have 200 children, whatever. They've got caseloads of 30 or 50 or 26 or 18. Sometimes you just have to accept that really, if we want to reduce those number of children in care so that social workers don't have 20, 30 cases, we need to just focus a little bit on one particular group, this one, and see if it works. So a small caseload will be difficult to protect, and there'll be levels of jealousy probably across the organisation for those that are bombarded by trying to do everything else they have to do with 20 families or whatever. You just got to hold true to the purpose of whether you're doing this or whether you're not. Information sharing, well, there we go. I mean, that's been around since the very first time you've ever looked at any serious case review, and we seem more frightened of sharing information than anything else, despite letters coming from ministers and everyone saying, share bits of information. We get obsessed with how difficult it is to share that. We haven't got the answer, but again, it's about keep taking it to the higher echelons of the organisation, to keep banging on that door and say, this just isn't right, so how do we get over it? And you will, and we have in certain areas, not so much in the others. Part of the message to the Secretary of State would be, sort out the information sharing between you and the rest of the government departments when you've initiated a project which is about sharing information. And that's been particularly tough with DWP. I'll put the third sector on there, interestingly. And information sharing there is quite an interesting one because it goes both ways. We don't want to with them, and they often refer and work with us, and then we don't tell them anything that we're doing. I'm talking about traditional statutory social work, if you like. And similarly, when we started working with PAWS and working with some of the third sector groups that work with some of these women, there was an element of, I don't know what the word would be best, maybe curiosity about what we're doing. Why are we getting involved? It'll scare them off. A perception around whether we were doing something different and why were we, if you like, this is maybe too strong a description, best way I could put it would be encroaching onto their business, as it were. And it wasn't about that. So again, don't assume your relationships with every single partner and everybody you need to work with. You'll need to work on every single relationship. And that thing about flexibility, it will be different in different areas. And it will be different with different people. So again, information sharing and working that out backwards and forwards. Well, I've already mentioned that about fast-tracking and fast-tracking and prioritisation is like swear words, aren't they? Particularly in local authorities. And you just have to swear a lot, I would say. You talked earlier on about Maslow's hierarchy needs, some of these basic needs, just focus in on them. If you're hungry, if you're cold, you're not going to get into therapy and self-realisation at that point, are you? And that all takes time, and I think, you have to support your practitioners in doing that, because a lot of their time will be navigating the chaos that we've managed to organise in terms of housing, benefits, health assessments and all the rest of it. I think the other challenge is measuring the change. You already talked about this cost avoidance thing, which is a phrase I like using because it's the only way I can demonstrate I've done anything. I've never actually reduced the budget, just have prevented spending more. When you think about the relatively simple way of working out if these children don't end up in care, it costs this amount. Actually, from day one, we need to be thinking about what does this whole thing cost, because that will be, for commissioners, the demonstration of whether this evidence-based thing will be a sustainable model. And immediately, you'll have some things right at the beginning, but as soon as you start getting some of these women on a more universally serviced approach to running their lives, you save money in terms of the visits to benefits, the visits to the doctors, this, that and the other. Never mind the sort of outcome at the end if they have a child that ends up being removed, right from the beginning. And so that's a difficult thing to measure because that's not necessarily what practitioners want to do. So, but we are trying to think about that because, the engagement of all these other professionals and working with people and the endless meetings you'll end up having, trying to swear a lot about priorities, does cost money, time and effort, but it is, I believe, worth it. I think I've stopped. That's me, done. 15 minutes. Thank you very much.